You're watching UATV News. My name is Ina Kosinska. Good evening. Expansion of the Normandy format or creation of another one. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy suggested this during a working trip to Ukraine's Kherson region on Tuesday. In the meantime, while Russia announced the withdrawal of its troops from its border with Ukraine, the Ukrainian military remain on full alert. The head of state has also discussed the situation and security issues with the leadership of the armed forces of Ukraine and NATO representatives. The details of the talks were not disclosed. Volodymyr Zelenskyy only noted that the Minsk agreements don't provide positive results. New countries need to be involved in these negotiations.
Involvement of other states in the negotiation platform, which should lead to an end of the war. I believe that this is the right idea and it's relevant today. This can be an expansion of the Normandy format or a separate, parallel format with other countries with powerful players.
The Office of the President of Ukraine is preparing a personal meeting of Volodymyr Zelenskyy with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Neither place nor date has been agreed yet. Chairman of the President's office, Andriy Yermak, noted that there is an urgent need to discuss the results of the agreements reached during the Normandy format summit in December. The Kremlin, however, confirms that they did get a request for negotiations from Ukraine, but they refused to discuss the situation in DONBAS. The Ukrainian parliament has approved the key land reform document. On Wednesday, the MPs gave green light to the land decentralization. The law stipulates the state agricultural land outside the settlements becomes the property of village and city councils. Why this law is needed and how it is planned to help the Ukrainian economy, our correspondents know.
За 284 рішення прийнято.
Over the past month and a half, the parliament has started more than 3,000 amendments to the bill. Due to this document, state lands outside of the settlements will be transferred to the property of territorial communities. Local councils will be able to manage those lands.
What we have adopted today are probably the biggest in terms of volume and quality amendments to land legislation since the approval of the Land Code. Those are transfer of land management powers to communities, simplification of land management, and the third part is the rights when buying out at existing tenants and holders of special permits.
More than 2 million hectares of agricultural land will be transferred to local governments. Another 750,000 hectares will remain in the state property. If necessary, local councils will be able to change the purpose of their plots. Previously, they didn't have such rights.
Землі розподіляються практично без нашої участі.
Lands are distributed, in fact, without our participation. We don't know who get them. This is very bad. We receive less funds to the local budgets. Lands stand idle, they're not cultivated, and this is all very bad.
The transfer of land should attract new investments to Ukraine, the government expects. With the full implementation of the land reform, the International Finance Corporation, a member of the World Bank Group, plans to invest about $3 billion into the Ukrainian economy until year 2024. This was announced by the former acting Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture.
This land management system is working properly and it allows to make a valuable asset out of the land. The businesses can attract a mortgage, it can be bought and sold. It will have specific owners who are interested in keeping track of that land, not destroying the soil layer. It will be more interesting to invest in land reclamation, improving the land and its productivity. This will accelerate the development of the agricultural sector.
The next step is the consideration of the following land bill. More than 800 amendments have been submitted to it. The document will give local councils the right to trade their lands, set a rental rate for them, as well as conduct open electronic auctions. This should make land trade transparent. The MPs want to approve this bill before June 1st, when the land market is planned to start working in Ukraine. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Artem Holub, UATV News.
600 million euros of macro-financial assistance will be allocated by the European Union to Ukraine by the end of the year, if the country successfully fulfills its homework on reforms. This was stated by head of the support group for Ukraine in the European Commission, Katarina Maternova. What are the results of European integration at this stage and what clauses of the agreement should be updated? Our correspondent found out.
Almost 60% of Ukrainians want their country to join the European Union. This is the result of the latest opinion poll by the Razumkov Center. Reforms that are carried out under the association agreement requirements are set to gradually approach Ukraine to European lifestyle and values.
We should comply our legislation with the best EU standards. This implies standards, for example, in construction and development, standards for the safety of life and for the safety of products. This means a lot of practical, real things that have the effect on the life of every person.
One of the key directions of Ukraine's European integration is the development of economic relations with the EU. The launch of a free trade zone over the years has made Europe Ukraine's main trading partner.
The European Union has a share of about 40% of our foreign trade. Historically, it was turned out that a third part of trade was with Russia, one-third with the EU, and another third with Asian countries. At present, the share of the European Union has grown from 30 to 40%. The share of Russia makes now only 5%.
Currently, Ukraine and the EU are preparing to revise the trade part of the agreement. The first round of negotiations is planned to take place in May. Experts say this is the right step because since 2012, when the text of the document was prepared, the conditions have changed. They are also expecting progress in negotiations on the so-called industrial visa waiver.
If we want to sell not only grain, not metal, but something more significant, then there will be a lot of checks. This means time. Time is money. An ordinary visa-free regime means that Ukrainian citizens can come to the EU, and it is good for the European Union. While the industrial visa-free regime means a competition to the European Union, our goods easily enter their markets and compete with EU goods. Accordingly, the internal opposition in the EU to this process is more serious.
Ukraine and the EU are also actively preparing to the bilateral summit. It is planned to be held in August or September. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Yulia Krychkova, UATV News.
A draft decision on monitoring the human rights situation in the occupied Crimea has been submitted to the Council of Europe. The document was presented by First Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Emina Japarova. She participated in the meeting of the Committee of the Ministers of the Council of Europe. She stressed that Ukraine will use all opportunities to protect human rights and freedoms in the occupied territories. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is going to arrive to Ukraine with a working visit. Next week, he's attending the G7 Foreign and Development Ministers meeting in London. After that, flies to Kyiv, the website of U.S. Department of State informs.
The secretary will then travel to Kyiv, Ukraine, May 5th and 6th, where he will meet with President Zelenskyy, Foreign Minister Kuleba, other officials, and representatives of Ukrainian civil society to reaffirm unwavering U.S. support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity in the face of Russia's ongoing aggression. He will also encourage continued progress on Ukraine's institutional reform agenda, particularly anti-corruption action, which is key to securing Ukraine's democratic institutions, economic prosperity and Euro-Atlantic future.
35 years ago, on April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl disaster happened. On Monday, on the International Day of Remembrance of this tragedy, President of Ukraine honored the memory of victims and opened a new storage facility for the spent nuclear fuel. Our correspondent will tell you more.
On the 35th anniversary of the accident at the fourth power unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy honored the memory of the liquidators and launched a new spent nuclear fuel storage facility. The ISF-2 will allow to store it for up to 100 years, due to the containers submerged in helium.
This is a significant step towards security in the Chernobyl zone, towards the security of Ukraine, security of Europe, and basically of the world. We take this step with boundless gratitude and respect to all liquidators of the consequences of the Chernobyl disaster, as well as with boundless faith and readiness to work with the sake of safety and environmentally friendly future of our children.
At present, the transformation of the Chernobyl exclusion zone into a safe space is one of the priorities for Ukraine. The EU and the United States support Kyiv in this process. The EU delegation calculated that since 1991 more than 1 billion euros have been allocated to improve nuclear safety in Ukraine. And the construction of a new confinement over the destroyed reactor cost the international community more than 2 billion euros.
U.S. officials at the State Department, USAID, and the Department of Energy, who have undertaken this work, understand that we cannot undo the human impact and suffering that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster caused. But we can take lessons from this accident, educate people to ensure its place in history is never forgotten.
The Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine suggests to increase pensions for victims and liquidators of the Chernobyl disaster. The bill has already been submitted to the parliament. In particular, they want to establish payments to liquidators of the consequences of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident at 5 times the minimum wage. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Valery Bakus, UATV News.
More than 600,000 people participated in eliminating the consequences of the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. 35 years ago, 2 explosions destroyed its 4th power generating unit. The disaster is considered the largest in the history of nuclear power industry, both in terms of the number of deaths and injuries. And in terms of economic damage, how the tragedy affected the fate of the liquidators and residents of the city of Prypiat, where plant's workers lived. Our journalists have prepared a special report. The accident occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. One of the power units sustained damages. Measures are being taken to eliminate the effects of the event. Assistance of the affected is provided. The government commission has been created.
Soviet media showed up first news coverage on the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant only about 3 days later. The Soviet Union recognized the problem only due to the pressure from European countries, which discovered an increase in the radiation level in their territories.
High and modern residential buildings, cutting-edge grocery markets and various specialized sports and cultural facilities. Then the city of Prypiat was called the advanced city, the calling card of socialism.
The evacuation of residents started 35 hours after the accident on the 27th of April. Many of the evacuated didn't suspect that they will never return home.
We were told that we have to leave for some 2-3 days. The same record has been constantly voiced through the radio. They told us to take only bare essentials. That's how they took us, then dropped off. We were met by the locals in other settlements who accommodated us. They said, like, come to us, come to us.
During the evacuation, Evgenia was 10 years old. She recalls that she had spent that summer at her relative's place, and as the fall approached, instead of returning to her home city of Prypiat, she had to find ways to settle in Kyiv for longer.
The very same apartment buildings, this one and the next. Many of the evacuees received apartments here in the same houses. Therefore, they had much in common all over the neighborhood.
Evgenia's husband, Alexander, also lived in Prypiat. He recalls that his parents had just completed flat improvement before the disaster forced them to leave.
That was a cozy, fine apartment. I had my room, my younger brother had his, and here we had to share one. There were friends, everything was there. There was a tremendous contrast between Kyiv and Prypiat. I remember those days vividly, even though I was small. Here everything is alien, everything is non-native.
After the accident, the former Prypiat residents were scattered through different cities and countries. Evgenia and Alexander met each other 5 years after the evacuation. Later, they got married and never parted.
I took this one on purpose. It's an original one.
Several times, the spouses managed to get to Prypiat to cast a fast look over the former dwelling.
It was a square here. This is where the sidewalk was. And there are the remains of the flower bed, most likely.
We visited our apartments in Prypiat. This one on photo looks great, I should say. Thought it's almost empty. But what is happening there now is much worse.
For a long time, the liquidators didn't leave the exclusion zone. Engineer Alexei Ananenko was among them. Along with 2 fellow divers, he descended into the floated chambers of the 4th atomic reactor to prevent a possible re-explosion. The episode with the liquidators divers more recently was filmed in the well-known HBO series Chernobyl. The scene was one of the most emotionally intensive of the series. Alexei recalls how they were passing the areas with especially dangerous level of pollution.
I knew that it would be wrong to dive right into the water, because the dose has been strong, and we put on the suit. There was such a little white head up there, and here it zipped off.
There was no fear then, he says. It was his work and duty.
Well, it was my duty, what can I say? That was a common action. Work. I was paid money. They ordered me, I did it.
Alexei still has a little understanding of how high the dose of radiation he received was. 3 years after the accident, he sustained heart problems. Insomnia, blood pressure and other serious illnesses are of constant concern now.
This year there was a suspicion of cancer. Even to get tested, one has to pay quite a sum of money. Chernobyl victims need medical care because it's unrealistic if there's no money. In fact, I don't know how to deal with it in this case.
In 1986, around the 1st of May, winds have changed their direction and started blowing from Chernobyl to Kyiv. Authorities kept silent. Then no one was going to protect people from radiation. On the contrary, they forced everyone to go to the 1st May parade, children and adults.
Each enterprise had to send its employees to the demonstration on the central Prypiat street in Kyiv, and so my friend attended this demonstration. Many had to. Peace, Labor, May, they carried posters.
In Kyiv alone, around 120,000 people took to the streets attending the traditional 1st May demonstration. That day, the level of radiation in the capital exceeded hundreds of times the normal level. Soviet authorities officially reported about the disaster at the Chornobyl plant on May 14. The regime's attempts to hide the scale of the tragedy are said to have sped up the collapse of the Soviet Union. Reported by Nick Starkov, Vlada Surkan, UATV News.
Starting May 1st, Kyiv softens the quarantine restrictions. The work of public transport will return to the usual mode, no special passes required. Shopping and entertainment centers, markets and fairs, cafes, bars, restaurants and gyms will also open. Starting May 5th, school kids will return to education institutions and kindergartens will resume their work.
I do emphasize that owners of all the places of public gatherings should understand that they are obliged to work adhering to all of the safety regulations, because in case the situation worsens again, we won't be able to avoid some new restrictions. Besides, mind that the city is going to enforce control over adherence to the quarantine regulations. The National Police and the Municipal Guard are going to organize additional patrols. They'll be working in parks, squares and other public places.
Over the past 24 hours, 10,072 new cases of COVID-19 have been recorded in Ukraine. More than 20,000 Ukrainians recovered. The Ministry of Health has already announced that the 3rd wave of coronavirus in Ukraine has started declining. Our correspondents will tell you more about the situation in the country.
Ukraine is almost getting out from the 3rd wave of the pandemic. This was stated in the Ministry of Health based on the main epidemic indicators. In order to prevent a new surge in morbidity during the Easter holidays, the department held consultations with representatives of the clergy.
In particular, we agreed on the duration of the services with a simultaneous increase in their number, fixing the doors of temples and churches so that they would be opened. We also agreed on a temporary ban on physical contact when performing rituals. These are cases of crosses, icons and shrines. We also recommend that only one representative of a family attend the rites and services. The clergy support us in this.
According to Stepanov, just over half of the beds for patients with COVID-19 are full now in hospitals. Meanwhile, to increase the number of immunizations, more than 2,000 vaccination points will be operating in Ukraine.
All of them will be open at medical institutions and will be equipped in accordance with the requirements of infection control.
At the same time, the European Union plans to purchase over 1 million doses of vaccines for the Eastern Partnership countries, including Ukraine. The drugs are intended for medical workers, but it is not known how much our country is going to receive. European Commissioner for European Neighborhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations announced this in an interview.
We are talking about 530,000 medical workers in the countries of the Eastern Partnership. We will have to give them 2 doses, so it is easy to calculate that this is over 1 million doses.
On Tuesday, the state railroad company of Ukraine, Ukrzaliznytsia, resumed its work in Chernivtsi, Transcarpathian and Ivano-Frankivsk regions. The ban on boarding and disembarking remains only in the Zhytomyr region because of the quarantine restrictions. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Danilo Kobza, UATV News.
Another 120 people in Ukraine received a 2nd dose of the coronavirus vaccine. Thus, 130 Ukrainians completed the full course of immunization. Earlier, more than 73,000 people have received the first jab, and since the beginning of the vaccination campaign, more than 700,000 Ukrainians have been vaccinated with 1 dose. Sinovac, AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines are used. Besides, on April 30, another batch of 500,000 doses of the Chinese Coronavac drug arrives to Ukraine. According to Chief State Sanitary Doctor of Ukraine, as soon as there are enough vaccines in the country, mobile teams will vaccinate all those registered.
Vaccination against the coronavirus disease is being held at corresponding sites. As of Thursday, 2,069 vaccination points worked in Ukraine. There are also mobile brigades giving the Pfizer and Sinovac jabs. And as soon as mass delivery of vaccines begins, we're going to open additional vaccination centers.
A renovated bridge across the KHADZHIBEY estuary was opened in Odessa region. It is a part of Kyiv-Odessa highway on the European route E95. The structure itself and all of its 6 lanes are repaired within the frameworks of the Grand Construction National Program. 9 years ago, drivers were allowed to use only one of the lanes. In 2019, the renovation and widening works have been started. Last year, they've opened 3 lanes. This time, the remaining ones. Workers managed to complete the works exactly before the beginning of the holiday season in Odessa, which starts on May 1st.
We clearly understand that the tourist flow is of extreme significance for the economy of Odessa city. Last year, we have seen drivers near Odessa going around the jumps, through fields, meadows and some local roads. There used to be significant jumps. That was the unpleasant thing.
A new tram resembling a spacecraft has been tested in Dnipro city. It was manufactured at the Pivdeny machine building plant. The designers have thoroughly thought out all the details to guarantee comfort for passengers. In particular, the tram has low-floor quiet cabin and air conditioning. After the tests are completed, the new model will enter the routes. Our correspondent will tell you more.
Maxim Rudyuk has been working as a tram driver for 18 years already. But it's for the first time he sees such a machine. He even had to undergo training to drive it.
It's a very comfortable machine, but it's sometimes difficult to drive it, considering its full length.
The new tram is twice as long as the old models. Its length is 27 meters. It carries more than 200 passengers and is convenient for all groups. The passenger compartment is silent and has the air conditioning system. The driver's cab is equipped with up-to-date electronics.
Specialists of the Dnipro enterprise spent 2 years to prepare the blueprints and assemble the first prototype. It was made of the materials and details manufactured in Ukraine.
15 trams assembled in Dnipro are already working in Egyptian city of Alexandria. 20 new ones will soon be delivered to the Ukrainian capital.
We are glad, obviously. We're glad that we've managed to enter the Ukrainian market with this model. This one is of particular interest because it's a big tram and it is very relevant for Kyiv.
They also wanted to set this tram in Dnipro. However, the city has to completely change the rails, they note in the Dnipro Transport Department.
We plan to completely renovate one of the tram routes in the city. There the new trams are planned to be introduced.
A number of new trams are now undergoing test drives. Before taking their first passengers on board, they have to drive no less than 1,000 kilometers. Reported by Vadim Kromer and Natalia Husak, UATV News.
On Sunday, May 2nd, Orthodox Christians celebrate Easter, or, as they call it in Ukraine, the Velykdyn, the day of resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is one of the brightest and the most majestic holidays in Ukraine, celebrated with a variety of traditions. It starts Sunday night when many believers attend the overnight church service. They bring baskets filled with traditional Easter foods like the Pascha bread, painted eggs, krashenkas and pisankas, and others. As part of the Mass, the Easter baskets will lit candles. With them are then blessed by the priest and taken home by the families to eat in the morning. People are also exchanging greetings like Christ is risen and He is risen indeed. For many people, it is the inspiring day of joy and happiness, which brings hope and confidence about the future. On behalf of UATV team, I want to send my best wishes for the upcoming Easter. Have a blessed holiday filled with happiness, love and faith. That's all for this hour. More updates on our official website, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook pages. Thank you for watching UATV channel. Goodbye.